know I've been talking in my articles and videos the past couple of weeks about how to get ready for 2021 startup draft. What we've done is we've looked back at the data from 2020 and looked back at the players who did really well in the Dynasty on a regular season and the playoffs. And then we looked at who should be some of your first round draft picks based on their performance last year, plus their contracts. And then we also looked at folks who you probably want to avoid because their contracts are too high and they're not worth the production for that amount of money. And then the last couple of weeks, we looked at players who had a great second half and really broke out and probably improved their draft stock for 2021. And then the following week, we looked at players who faded in the second half of the draft and probably dropped down on your draft board, or maybe they didn't drop down. Maybe they're going to be in the same spot and they drop down on others' draft board and you're going to get a good value for 2021. But all those articles and videos are about basically about the importance of drafting. So what we're going to do here is this week is we're going to talk a little bit more about that in anticipation of some articles that are coming up and videos that are coming up in the following weeks, in which we're going to try to do some draft strategies, talk about some draft strategies, and see whether those strategies were successful or not successful based on last year, people who drafted last year in Dynasty Owner and either won their league title or were in the final top 25 from the chase for the ring. And if you were in the top 25 of the chase for the ring last year at the end of the season, you basically had one of the top 25 scoring teams and you won your Dynasty Owner title. So you had to be good the whole season, not just in the regular season, but you had to come through. Your team had to come through for you in the playoffs as well. So the first thing we're going to do is sort of talk about how to draft like a chase for the ring champion. And since we've only had two, it's kind of not too difficult to look at. Our first chase for the ring winner was Eddie. And Eddie's team, New York Strongest, he had a great draft. We don't have the exact positions. I don't have the exact positions that he drafted folks in, but he was able to draft the number one quarterback in 2019, Lamar Jackson, the number one running back, Christian McCaffrey, the number one wide receiver, Michael Thomas, and the number one tight end, Travis Kelce. He got all of those guys in the draft. And pretty much if you're drafting all the top scoring players at their position in the draft, you had a great draft and you probably will have a great season, irregardless of being able to pick up or trade for other players. Now we move to last year's draft. And we'll look at our 2020 Chase for the Ring winner, Victor, and look at his draft. And here is Victor's first 6 draft picks in order. As you can see, he had the number 10 pick, and he started off by drafting Patrick Mahomes, followed that up with Dalvin Cook in the second round, Tyreek Hill in the third round, Travis Kelce in the fourth round, Mike Evans in the fifth round, and then Davante Adams in the sixth round. And I want you to look here, right here in this column, the 2020 overall rank column. You can see that all 6 of those guys, while drafted in the top 63, were all in the top 42. Mike Evans was the worst at 42. But 5 out of the 6 picks that Victor had in his first 6 rounds finished the season in the top 25 in Dynasty Owner. In a 12-team league, the top 24, you should expect to have 2 of those players per team on average. And Victor had 5 of them and drafted in the first 6 rounds. Now, if you look at their position ranks, you can see a lot of single digits here. You got 3, 3, 2, 1, 1. So basically, Victor was able to draft the top tight end, Travis Kelce, and the top wide receiver, Davante Adams, as well as the second-ranked wide receiver in Tyreek Hill, and the third-ranked running back in Dalvin Cook, and the third-ranked quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. While he didn't have as great of a draft as Eddie, that's a great draft. So back to me, and we see, so basically those guys won the ring and they drafted very well. So, the obvious contention would be, well, let's just look at what they did, the teams who did really well last year did, and draft those guys. Well, that's one way to look at things, but it's not the only way. And if you just drafted players in 2021 who did well in 2020, you're probably not winning the ring. You might win your league, but you're probably not winning the ring. I mean, for example, you take a look at Eddie's draft in 2019. If you looked at that in preparation for your 2020 draft, you would try to be getting Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, and Travis Kelce. Those would have been 4 great draft picks. I mean, it was unlikely that you'd get all 4 of those because McCaffrey and Jackson were pretty much the top 2 of the top players taken overall. But if by chance you happen to get all those players, you probably wouldn't have done as well. You would not have done as well as Eddie did in 2019, in 2020. And it's because McCaffrey got injured, Thomas got injured, and didn't perform as well when he played. And Jackson, he went from the number 1 quarterback in 2019 to the number 11 quarterback in 2020. So only Kelce was the number 1 player in 2019 and 2020. So as you can see, there's kind of a limit on just looking back at last year's performance and previous year's performance. You've got to do other things to make sure that you draft a winning dynasty on your team. Some of the things we talked about is looking at, you look at full season performance, but then you can look at the last couple of weeks of the year to see if any players improved. You can also check out players to see if they've dropped in the second half of the year, as we talked about before. But even if you did that, all of that, the thing that makes Dynasty Owner different, as we always talk about, than regular Dynasty leagues or regular redraft leagues, is that you have to think about salaries. You just can't go out there and draft Ezekiel Elliott, Michael Thomas, Travis Kelce, Russell Wilson, and expect to be able to put together a team. Those guys are great, but at that point, you're going to have drafted like most of your salary. You're going to have 4 guys, and you're going to have drafted like 80 million of your salary cap, which is going to limit you for the rest of your team. And if one of those players gets hurt, doesn't perform, you've really hurt your team. So, I mean, you've got to. That's why in Dynasty you've got to balance things. That's one thing to look at, and then sort of that. Then the point becomes, okay, so now that I've got to think about salaries, I got to think about past performance. What's the best strat? Is there a strategy that's worked in Dynasty Owner, or is there a strategy that works in general in fantasy football for drafting a winning team? I mean, I looked at a lot of things on the internet and just following things, and my contention always is that for every 12-team league, there's 12 different draft strategies. You've got 12 owners, 12 different ways of thinking about putting together your team. And when you get into the draft, then some of those draft strategies change. But going in, you usually have 12 people who have 12 different ideas on how they're going to fill their team. Some people are going to want to draft a quarterback early. Some people are going to draft them late. I mean, in my article, you can see I had 2 different takes from 2 different respectable fantasy analysts who basically had completely different opinions on what to do with the tight end position. One of them said waiting is something I've had great success with in the past. And another analyst said, elite tight ends like Travis Kelce and George Kittle are difference makers, and you should draft them in the first, second, or third round. So 2 completely different opinions. And interestingly, as I was doing my research, I even came across an analyst who had 2 completely different takes on the 0 running back strategy, which is basically that you don't draft running backs early. They're as likely drafting a running back early, he's just as likely to get injured as drafting someone late. So effectively what you do is you wait, you pick the best players at like quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, and then you wait till later in the middle rounds of the draft, like your 6th, 7th round-ish or so, depending on the strategy, to start taking running backs. And you take a lot of running backs there in the hopes that 1 or 2 of them will pan out for your team. But the funny thing was, I was looking at some different strategies, and I saw 2 articles, one from 2019 and one from 2020, by the same analyst from a major newspaper who had completely different takes on 0 running back in consecutive seasons. In 2019, his title was How to Win Your Fantasy Football Draft Using the 0 Running Back Strategy. Seems like a great idea for strategy for winning. Then the next year, the title of his article, roughly the same time, both in August, was Don't Waste Your Time with the 0 Running Back Strategy in Fantasy Football Drafts. I mean, I'm not sure what changed between 2019 and 2020, besides no preseason, to make your assessment change completely on a strategy, but that's what happened. So it's clear that analysts are going to differ on strategies. And in terms of Dynasty, we're so new and innovative, and there's only 2 years of history, there's no way to sort of aren't a lot of competing strategies out there. There's some ideas. I had some draft tips the last couple of years. I know Dynasty owner Tim has one theory in which he advocates that you leave money after the draft, that you don't draft your team up to the salary cap limit. You leave some money so you have room to maneuver. And so what we're going to be able to do in the future, in the next couple of weeks, before free agency starts and players start getting your new salaries, and we can start to rank players and look at them relative to other players, because we'll have their salaries. Not finally, so we have the second piece of the equation for Dynasty owner, not just past performance and future, but we also have their salaries, which you're going to need to know because you have to fit all the players under a salary cap. What we can do is we have some data from 2020. We can start analyzing that and looking at different strategies. What strategy worked? Is there a particular place in the draft that you want to be at? Is there a particular amount of salary that you want to spend in your draft relative to the other teams so that you can win? I mean, what players were drafted first overall, and figure out if it was high salary, low salary. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways you can approach this, your Dynasty owner draft. And we're going to look at some ideas on different approaches, different strategies, and if any of them were effective in 2020. So if you've got a strategy, if you had a strategy last year, or maybe you're coming into this new and you've got a strategy for this year, let me know. Send me a tweet. My Twitter address is there. It's @StevieT33. Tell me what your strategy is. Maybe I'll be able to look at the data and figure out if that was a winning strategy for Dynasty owners in 2020. Maybe it will. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it will be in 2021. But we can take a look at that. I've got some ideas that I've put down in previous years, and we can see if I was right or wrong. We can look at Tim's draft strategy and see if that one's right or wrong. And there's others. Let me know. Post in the comments if you have anything. Send me a tweet. Just let's engage. Let's figure out if there's anything we can figure out between now and March, so that by the time players start signing free agent deals and trades, start being active, we can start looking at we can have our ideas, and we can start looking at different players to execute on those ideas and strategies. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Please make sure to read the articles and watch the videos from the other Dynasty owner writers. You've got Nate Christian, who's breaking down rookies every week with his prospect preview. You've got Matt the Jerk, who every week is looking at a different team and talking about the contracts for next season, and how for each team, week after week, he's been looking at different teams. Then if you're in a rebuild, if your team didn't do so well last year and you're looking to rebuild, watch and read Jay Pound's articles on that, and watch his videos on how to rebuild your Dynasty owner roster. Make sure to follow all those guys as well as me on Twitter, and follow Dynasty owner as well, which is @Dynasty_owner. And thanks for watching this video. Thanks for reading the article, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.